For every daughter who was forgotten, for every quiet heart that carried love and truth like a hidden flame. If you've ever been silenced by those who should have cherished you, or told your devotion was too soft to matter, this story is for you. The banquet hall shimmered with an opulence that felt both familiar and alien to me. Crystal chandeliers spilled fractured light over tables dressed in ivory linens, the air itself heavy with the scent of roses and aged whiskey. I stood at the edge of it all, a silent observer, the daughter whose name no one seemed to remember. A quartet played softly in the corner, their strings weaving a gentle waltz that seemed to mock the hollow grandeur of the evening. Laughter rolled across the room in gentle waves, punctuated by the clinking of glasses as board members in tailored suits and silk gowns drifted from conversation to conversation like dancers in a ballet I had never been taught. I wore a dress of deep midnight blue, its fabric a gentle caress against my skin. My mother's favorite color. I hoped in some quiet corner of his mind my father might remember that. The pearls at my throat, small and luminous, felt like armor. My breath was calm, deliberate, my heart a thunderous beat beneath the calm mask I wore. Then my father stepped forward, his posture straight, his face composed in that way that once made him the titan of this empire. His hair, streaked with silver, caught the light like old moonlight. My gaze fell on his hand, veined, unsteady as he lifted a glass to address the gathered board. "Thank you all for joining me," he began, his voice carrying that note of authority I remembered from my childhood. My chest tightened with the echo of that memory, the way he used to say my name as if it were a prayer. He gestured toward the head of the table, where Mina stood with a practiced smile, her hand light on his arm. She wore a dress of pale gold that clung to her figure like a second skin, her eyes bright and watchful. My father's hand trembled as he introduced her, the words coming slowly. And beside me," he said, turning his gaze to me for the briefest flicker of a second. My heart paused, poised on the edge of hope. "This is an unknown girl, a guest," he said finally, the words soft, almost apologetic. A hush fell over the room, delicate as the clink of crystal. My breath caught in my throat, the world blurring at the edges. Laughter trickled from a corner of the table, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through silk. Mina's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, her eyes glinting with a cold amusement as she raised her glass, as if to toast the erasure of my name. I lowered my gaze, my fingers tightening around the stem of my own glass. My pulse thudded in my ears, yet outwardly I remained still, a statue carved from ice and fragile bone. This isn't anger, this is betrayal in velvet gloves. I told myself to breathe slowly, to hold on to the dignity that had been my mother's gift to me. My father's eyes flickered away as if the sight of me, unclaimed, unspoken for, was too much to bear. The weight of his forgetting pressed on my ribs like an iron band. I excused myself from the table, my movements graceful and unhurried, though each step felt like a performance teetering on the brink of collapse. In the corridor beyond the banquet, the music became a distant murmur, the laughter muffled by thick velvet curtains. The old portraits of my ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes watching with the cold indifference of centuries. My reflection wavered in the polished marble floors. Elara Kim, 22, and exiled in her own home. He once called me his brightest star, I thought, my throat tightening. He once promised to protect me against the world. I found myself at the threshold of his private study. The door was slightly ajar, a thin line of lamplight cutting through the darkness like a blade. I hesitated, half afraid, half hopeful, before I slipped inside. He sat in an armchair by the window, the city's lights painting his profile in silver and shadow. The tremor in his hands was subtle, but I saw it. Each finger twitched, a testament to the silent war waging inside his mind. His eyes were lost in the distance, unfocused, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself. The air smelled faintly of the cedar oil he favored, comforting and achingly familiar. I sank to my knees at his side, the cold marble floor biting through the silk of my gown. My hand reached for his, fingers brushing skin that felt as fragile as rice paper. His skin was warm, a reminder that he was still here, somewhere beneath the fog. Appa, I whispered, the word a breath of devotion I had carried since I was a child. I know you're lost, not cruel. He turned his head slowly, his eyes drifting down to me. In their depths, a flicker of something. Recognition, or perhaps only a glimmer of memory, passed like a shooting star in the night. His lips parted as if to speak, but the words tangled themselves in the fog of his mind. For a moment, there was only the silence of our breathing, the music of the banquet seeping through the walls like a distant heartbeat. The lights from the window caught in the silver of his hair, and I let myself imagine that he saw me, truly saw me, even if only for a heartbeat. His fingers twitched, a small, desperate movement, and I tightened my grip around his hand. I will find a way back to you, I vowed silently, the words forging themselves in the spaces between our breaths, not to punish you, but to protect you. To protect the man you once were. His mouth moved again, but the words would not come. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the way his brow furrowed with the effort. My heart ached for him, this proud man trapped in a maze he could not escape. I rested my forehead against the back of his hand, the pearls at my throat cold against my skin. My tears were silent, slipping down my cheeks like secrets. I will not let her steal the last of you, I whispered, so softly the words barely existed. Even if you never remember me, I will remember you. I will remember the father who loved me before the world taught him to forget. The door opened a crack, light spilling in from the hallway. Mina stood there, her eyes sharp, her smile a curve of polished cruelty. "Ilara," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "The guests are waiting. Don't keep them waiting." I rose slowly, the mask of calm slipping over my features once more. I turned back to my father, pressing his hand to my lips in a fleeting, tender gesture. He blinked, confusion washing over his face like a tide. Then his gaze drifted past me to Mina, and whatever spark had lived in his eyes was gone, swallowed by the fog. I stepped back into the hall, the music swelling once more, the laughter returning to fill the spaces my name had never touched. Mina's laughter was the loudest of all, echoing softly in the corners of the world I once called home. I lifted my chin. My footsteps measured as I returned to the feast of strangers. My heart burned in my chest, not with fury, but with resolve. You may have forgotten me, Appa, but I will not let her erase me. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing away the final flicker of my father's gaze, already dissolving back into the mist of his confusion. The hallway was quiet, the muffled music of the banquet replaced by the faint ticking of an antique clock. My hand lingered on the polished wood of the door, fingers pressed to the surface as if the memory of that fleeting moment of recognition could be held in my palm. The night had retreated to a hushed darkness, leaving me alone with the echo of that lost breath. Ilara, my daughter, a ghost of the father I once knew. My footsteps carried me away from the grandeur of the banquet hall and down a corridor lined with memories, portraits in gilt frames, the muted gleam of ancient vases, the scent of old books and dust. My mother's presence lingered here, a gentle whisper in the hush of silk curtains. In my father's old study, the air smelled of cedar and faded ink. I moved slowly, almost reverently, to the mahogany desk that had once been his kingdom. My fingers brushed over the surface, tracing the grain, worn smooth by decades of his hands. Hands that once lifted me to the stars, that once taught me how to hold a pen with grace. I pulled open a drawer, expecting ledgers and forgotten contracts, but found instead a single envelope, yellowed with time and tied with a thin red ribbon. My breath caught in my throat as I untied the ribbon, my fingers trembling with the weight of it. Inside, a letter waited, the paper thin and fragile, the handwriting familiar and heartbreakingly uncertain. The ink had faded to a soft gray, the strokes uneven, as though each word had been pulled from a mind already slipping away. "To my daughter," it began, the letters tilting like a wavering flame. "Always remember that you are the light in the dark, my little star, even when I have no words left to give you." Tears blurred the page, each word a knife that carved both comfort and sorrow into my chest. I pressed the letter to my lips, breathing in the faint scent of my father's cologne, amber and sandalwood, a scent that had once meant home. He remembered me once. In the haze of confusion, there was still a part of him that held my name like a prayer. The room seemed to hold its breath with me, the soft sigh of the curtains at the window the only sound. My tears fell onto the paper, small blooms of water that threatened to erase the fragile ink. I folded the letter carefully, cradling it to my chest like a promise. My heart was a quiet, steady beat beneath my ribs, no longer a drum of fury, but a vow. The next morning dawned soft and cold, pale sunlight pooling across the breakfast table like spilled milk. The dining room was a painting of quiet luxury, white tablecloths pressed to perfect lines, silver glinting under the glow of the morning light. Mina sat at the head of the table, her hair gathered in a sleek knot at the nape of her neck, a single pearl pinned above her ear. She held her teacup with a casual grace, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. My father sat beside her, his suit impeccable, though his hands fidgeted in his lap, fingers twisting a linen napkin into soft creases. He looked smaller in the bright light of morning, the giant of my childhood shrunken beneath the weight of his own mind. I took my seat across from them, the chair cool and stiff beneath my spine. My fingers found the edge of my plate, tracing the delicate gold pattern that circled the porcelain. My father's gaze drifted over me once, soft and unfocused, before settling again on Mina's careful smile. She spoke softly to him, words that curled like smoke in the quiet air. "Father, the board was so pleased last night. They know you've secured the future. Our future." Her eyes flicked to me, a glint of triumph in their depths. I held the letter in my mind like a shield, each word a reminder that I was not invisible. The maid poured coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. My father turned to me, his brow furrowing with polite confusion. His eyes, the color of winter skies, searched my face as if I were a puzzle he could no longer solve. "Miss," he said softly, his voice gentle and patient, the tone of a man speaking to someone who served his table. "Would you mind waiting to speak until I finished with Miss Mina? It's not proper for the staff to interrupt." The words fell like winter rain, soft yet bitterly cold. My breath caught in my throat, my hands tightening around the edge of my chair. "I am your daughter," I wanted to scream. "I am not the staff, not a stranger to be dismissed." Instead, my voice was a whisper, quiet but clear. "Appa," I said, my lips trembling around the word. "I'm your daughter." His eyes widened, flickering with something. A flash of memory, a question unspoken. Then he shook his head gently, a sad, patient smile touching his lips. "Please," he said, his tone tender, as if calming a child, "do not speak out of turn in front of Miss Mina." Mina's laughter was soft, a silvery chime that turned the air to glass. "Elara, you mustn't trouble him so early in the day," she said, her tone sweet as honey and twice as sticky. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist with practiced intimacy. "Father needs peace." "Don't you, father?" He nodded, confusion smoothing into docility. His gaze turned to the window, to the pale blue sky beyond, and he said nothing more. I bit back the tears that burned in my throat, swallowing them like shards of glass. My fingers relaxed, smoothing the napkin in my lap with careful precision. In that moment, I saw the truth of it. Not malice in my father's eyes, but a fog that had stolen his clarity. A prison built of failing neurons and lost memories. I see the fog in his eyes. This is not cruelty, it is a prison. Mina watched me with that same small smile, her victory as polished as the silver on the table. Yet in the quiet spaces of my mind, my resolve burned brighter than her gleaming pearls. Love and justice were not enemies. They were the twin blades I would wield. My father's letter had carved that truth into the marrow of my bones. I rose from the table with measured calm, my hand smoothing the front of my pale dress. Mina's eyes followed me, a flicker of curiosity in their depths, as if she could sense the shift in me. In the hallway, the air was cool and still, the scent of fresh lilies drifting from a vase near the window. I paused, pressing a hand to the wall, feeling the faint vibration of life within the old stones of this house. I will find the cracks in her mask. I will show him the truth, even if he can never hold it in his hands again. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of myself in a gilt-framed mirror. Dark hair falling in soft waves, eyes that held both sorrow and steel. My reflection did not flinch. I carried my father's letter in my heart, each word an anchor to the girl I would not let the world erase. The echo of my father's gentle reprimand clung to my skin like a bruise, tender yet invisible. I walked down the long, silent hallway, each step measured and deliberate, as though the rhythm of my footfalls could keep my heart from splintering further. My reflection in the tall, arched windows was a wraith. Dark hair cascading over my shoulders, eyes bright with unshed tears, lips pressed into a line of quiet resolve. The letter lay folded in the pocket of my coat, a fragile scrap of paper that had become my anchor in this house of illusions. My fingers found it, brushing over the soft, worn edges. He remembered once. That is enough. That is my proof. I spent that morning wandering the halls, letting the cool marble beneath my fingertips ground me. Every portrait, every polished banister, every inch of this mansion carried the weight of the family name. Kim, a name that had become both a crown and a chain around my throat. When the sun slipped behind the city skyline, painting the sky in soft streaks of rose and indigo, I made my way to the small annex at the far end of the estate. The air here was different. Thicker with the scent of old paper and polished wood, the hush of secrets whispered over decades. This was where the family accountant kept his records, in a hidden study that had once been my mother's refuge. I paused before the door, the brass knob cool beneath my palm. The memories pressed close in the dim light, the faint echo of my mother's laughter, the scent of her jasmine perfume woven into the curtains. I drew a breath, the air filling my lungs with the weight of inheritance and memory, and stepped inside. The room was lit by a single brass lamp, its warm glow spilling over piles of ledgers stacked like silent sentinels. The accountant, a man with gentle eyes and hair the color of snow, sat behind the desk, his posture straight despite the years etched into his frame. He looked up at my arrival, his expression calm and unsurprised. "Miss Ilara," he said, his voice a quiet murmur that seemed to blend with the rustle of turning pages. "I wondered when you would come." His words fell like a balm on my frayed spirit. I crossed the room, each step sinking into the thick, ancient carpet that muffled the world outside. My fingers brushed the spines of the ledgers, their leather covers worn smooth by decades of quiet labor. "I had to be sure," I said, my voice low, threading through the silence like a promise. "I had to know if there was anything left that was truly mine." His eyes, a warm brown softened by age, watched me with a sadness that felt almost tender. "Your mother left you more than money, Miss Ilara. She left you a way back in." He gestured to the ledgers, the soft lamplight turning the gold lettering into whispers of possibility. My fingers hesitated over the oldest volume, the air thick with the scent of paper and ink. I drew it close, feeling the weight of it settle into my hands. The pages opened with a soft sigh, revealing a lifetime of numbers, investments, hidden trusts, quiet purchases made under my mother's name. In the cramped margin of one page, a note in her hand, "For Ilara. When the world forgets her, may these numbers remember." A tremor ran through me, as though my mother had reached across the years to press her palm to my heart. Even in death she left me a map, a way to reclaim what was always mine. I spent hours in that room, the lamplight flickering in time with the slow, deliberate rhythm of my breath. Each ledger was a chapter of betrayal and love. Assets hidden from Mina's reach, investments made in my name before I was old enough to understand their worth. My mother's quiet rebellion, written in ink and numbers. The accountant sat across from me, his fingers tapping a slow, patient rhythm on the desk. "These are not just numbers, Miss Ilara," he said softly. "They are your mother's final act of devotion. She believed that one day you would need a way back." My eyes met his, the steel in my gaze cutting through the fog of grief. "Then I will find my way back, no matter how long it takes." He inclined his head, the faintest smile touching the corners of his lips. "Your mother would be proud." When I emerged from the study, the night had deepened into velvet darkness. The corridors of the house hushed and watchful. The world beyond the tall windows was a tapestry of city lights, each one a promise of something more than survival. The next morning dawned sharp and bright, the winter sun slicing through the tall windows of the boardroom. Mina sat at the head of the table, her hair a glossy river of black, her smile as polished as the silver bracelets circling her wrists. The board members shifted in their seats, voices hushed as they turned the pages of quarterly reports. I slept into the room with quiet composure, the files in my hands held like weapons sheathed in silk. My dress was a deep green today. Calm, assured. My eyes found my father's where he sat beside Mina, his gaze unfocused, drifting across the faces that blurred in his mind. Mina's eyes met mine, her smile tightening. She gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Elara, do take a seat," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want to disturb the balance of things, would we?" I took my seat without hesitation, my back straight, each breath measured. As Mina spoke of mergers and acquisitions, her voice a soft, commanding hum, I opened my folder and spoke softly, my tone calm, each word deliberate. "Have the audits been cross-checked against the offshore accounts listed in the Legacy Trust?" My question cut through the quiet like a blade, and the boardroom stilled, the weight of the question settling into the polished table like a ghost. Mina's smile faltered for a heartbeat, a flicker of something dark crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "Of course," she said, her voice light. "There is nothing to find there." I let the silence stretch between us, my gaze unblinking. "I would like to review them myself." The board members shifted, uncertainty and curiosity stirring in their eyes. My father's gaze moved to me, confusion softening into a faint crease of his brow, as if some part of him remembered a time when I had been the one to sit beside him, learning the rhythms of this empire. Mina's fingers tightened around her pen, her knuckles white against the smooth gold. "Perhaps you should leave these matters to those who understand them," she said, her tone sweet as poisoned honey. I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "I understand enough, and I have every right to ask." In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of old power shifting in the hush. My father's gaze lingered on me, a flicker of recognition in the depths of his eyes. Brief, fragile, but there. Then Mina's hand found his wrist, her touch light as silk, and he turned away once more, confusion returning to wash away the spark of memory. My heart ached at the sight, but my resolve only grew sharper. He may forget me, but I will not let him forget who he raised me to be. As the meeting dissolved into murmurs and uncertain glances, I gathered my files, my hands steady. Mina's eyes met mine across the room, her smile brittle, her silence a challenge. The game had begun, and I would not leave the board until the truth was laid bare. The door closed behind me, the quiet click of the latch a promise of battles yet to come. My reflection in the glass was no longer a shadow, but a girl reborn in the quiet rebellion of numbers and hidden legacies. Whether I will find my way back, no matter how long it takes. The weight of the boardroom's hush lingered on my skin as I stepped back into the corridors of our ancestral home. My heart beat slow and sure, a steady pulse of resolve in the echo of my mother's ledgers. I carried them in my mind like a hidden melody, each number a note of quiet defiance against Mina's careful lies. As the late afternoon sun burned low, the house itself seemed to breathe with the shifting air, shadows lengthening across the polished floors, the scent of winter jasmine drifting from a vase in the foyer. I moved through these halls like a ghost who refused to be forgotten, each footstep a soft rebellion against the silence that threatened to consume my name. Dinner that evening was a carefully choreographed performance. Mina's stage, the table her altar of power. The dining room was lit with the golden glow of a chandelier, every flicker of light catching the diamond at Mina's throat, making it burn like a cold star. She sat beside my father, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve, her smile practiced into something sweet and unassailable. I took my seat across from them, smoothing my dress, an emerald silk that caught the lamplight in soft, glimmering waves. My father's eyes lifted to mine, the fog in them almost beautiful in its tragedy. There was confusion, a flicker of fear, and somewhere, buried deep, a spark that recognized the shape of my face, though the name eluded him. Mina poured him a glass of wine. her touch tender, her voice a gentle hum of devotion. "Father, you must be careful." "She has plans," she said, each word carefully measured, slipping like a blade between his ribs. "She will take everything you've built. She will steal what you've given your life to protect." Her voice was music and poison. My father's hand trembled around the stem of the glass, his gaze darting to me with an uncertainty that cut deeper than any knife. I held his eyes, steady and calm, though my pulse roared in my ears. "Appa," I said softly, my voice a breath of light in the dark. "You know me. You know my heart." He blinked, confusion deepening into something almost like suspicion. "Elara," he murmured, the name falling from his lips like a question he did not know how to answer. Mina's smile widened, her hand tightening over his. "She will betray you, father. She wants your fortune, your power. She sees you only as an obstacle." My breath caught, the air in my lungs turning to glass. I see what she does, how she winds her lies around his mind like a silk thread, pulling him further from me with each word. My father's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, his lips trembling as he turned to me. His voice was hoarse, a ghost of the man I had known. "Why, Elara?" he asked, each word raw and trembling. "Why would you do this to me?" The room fell silent, the question hanging in the air like a weight that crushed the breath from my chest. I rose from my seat, moving around the table slowly, each step deliberate and quiet. My hand reached for his, the skin of his knuckles cool and fragile beneath my touch. "Opa," I whispered, my voice breaking on the name that had once been a promise of love. "I'm still your daughter. I'll prove it, even if you never remember." His eyes met mine, glistening with confusion, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw the father I had loved. Clear and certain, the man who had lifted me into his arms and called me his little star. Then Mina's hand slipped from his wrist to his shoulder, a soft weight that pulled him back into the darkness. His free hand lifted in a trembling motion, and in that moment he struck me, an old man's slap, more a brush of skin than a blow, yet it cracked the world in two. My cheek burned with the ghost of his touch, my breath caught in my throat, as tears welled hot and blinding. I did not flinch, I did not turn away. My eyes held his, and in that moment I saw not cruelty, but the fragile terror of a mind that could no longer trust its own truths. His hand fell away, his shoulders slumping beneath the weight of his own confusion. Mina's smile was small and sharp, a cat's contentment in the stillness. "You see, father? She brings only pain," she murmured, her voice a gentle caress that only deepened the wound. I stepped back, my hands folded in front of me, the silence between us louder than any scream. My father turned his face away, his breath ragged, his eyes lost in the shimmering darkness beyond the window. Dinner ended in a hush that felt final. A performance concluded, the actors bowing in the dim glow of the chandelier. I left the table with my head held high, the echo of my father's question carved into my bones like a promise I could not yet keep. In the quiet of the hallway, I paused to touch my cheek, the skin warm where his hand had met it. My tears fell slowly, silent and unashamed. I would not let them see me broken. The music room was a sanctuary at the end of a long corridor, its door a simple pane of carved wood. I slipped inside, closing the world out with a soft click. The air smelled of old sheet music and cedar, a scent that clung to my memories of my mother, her laughter echoing in the quiet between each note. I sat at the piano bench, the ivory keys cool beneath my fingertips. In the soft glow of a single lamp, I pressed play on the old reel-to-reel recorder that sat in the corner, its spools spinning slowly as my father's voice filled the room. Clear and bright, laughter echoing in the hush like a memory I could almost touch. "Elara," he said in the recording, his voice young and sure, each syllable wrapped in the warmth of devotion. "My little star, my hope, promise me you will always remember who you are." Tears slipped down my cheeks, warm rivers that fell onto the keys, turning ivory to pearl in the dim light. My fingers hovered over the piano, each breath a prayer, each note a vow. I will show him the truth, not for me, but for the father who once loved me. Even if he never remembers, I will not let the world forget what he meant to me. The music room became my sanctuary, each note a thread I wove between the girl I had been and the woman I was becoming. In the quiet, I found the shape of my resolve, sharp and bright, forged in the crucible of betrayal. Outside the window, the night pressed close, the city lights shimmering like distant stars. I closed my eyes and let the music fill me. My father's laughter, my mother's gentle smile, the echo of a name I would not let be taken from me. The battle was not over. My heart burned with the quiet fire of a promise kept in the dark. My story was not yet done. The music of my father's laughter played in the shadows of the music room long after the recorder stopped. My tears had dried on my cheeks, salt and memory etched into my skin like an invisible script. Outside the window, the night city glowed, a tapestry of golden lights and distant dreams. I traced the pattern of piano keys with a single finger, the memory of my mother's gentle hand guiding mine in a long-ago lesson echoing in the stillness. This house has always been a stage of illusions, I thought, my heart slow and steady now. Mina plays her role with honeyed words, her smile a blade. I will play mine in silence and precision. I rose from the piano bench, the quiet of the room settling around me like a cloak. My feet moved softly through the darkened halls, the heavy doors of the study waiting at the end of the corridor. I pressed my hand to the wood, feeling the faint warmth of the house's heart beating beneath my palm. The ledgers waited beyond, a map of quiet defiance left behind by a woman who had never needed an audience to know her worth. Inside, the accountant sat in the pool of lamplight, his glasses low on his nose as he flipped through ancient records. He looked up at my arrival, his eyes patient and knowing, the soft glow painting the fine lines of his face in gentle relief. "Miss Ilara," he said quietly, "you look as though you've found the resolve you were searching for." I moved to stand beside him, my fingers brushing the worn leather of the ledgers. "I have," I said softly, each word a promise. "I see now that love and power are not enemies. My mother taught me that." He nodded once, his eyes searching mine. She was a woman of quiet strength. She saw what this family could be, even as it turned on itself. I traced the edge of an open ledger, the numbers and notes like a secret language beneath my touch. "I will finish what she began," I murmured. "Not for the empire Mina craves, but for the memory of the man my father was, before her lies stole him from me." In the days that followed, I moved through the house like a ghost with purpose. My mornings began in the accountant's study, the hush of old paper and the slow scratch of ink grounding me. Offshore trusts, hidden assets, lines of numbers that sang of devotion and careful planning. My mother's final testament woven through each page. In the afternoons, I carried these truths with me like invisible armor. I slipped through the marble halls with a calm grace, my steps deliberate and unhurried. In board meetings, I took my seat at the far end of the table, the emerald of my dress deep and unyielding, my eyes steady on Mina's careful smile. She wore white that day, a pristine dress that shimmered like moonlight, her hair pinned with a single diamond clip. She spoke with the soft cadence of a lullaby, her words a gentle, poisonous hum. "Our family's future is secure," she told the board, her voice as smooth as silk. "My father's wishes are clear, and I have done everything in my power to honor them." I lifted my eyes from the stack of documents before me, my fingers tracing the edge of the ledger in my lap. "Have the overseas investments been reconciled with the foundation's accounts?" I asked, my tone mild and unhurried. A hush fell across the room, the faint creak of leather chairs and the rustle of papers the only sound. Mina's eyes met mine, and in that moment, her smile tightened, a fleeting shadow beneath the polished mask. "They have," she said softly, but I saw the flicker in her gaze, the breath she caught before she spoke. I let the silence stretch, each second a small victory. My father watched me from the head of the table, his eyes lost in the fog of his mind, yet there was a faint furrow to his brow, a flicker of something. Memory, perhaps, or only instinct. "I see you, Appa, even if you do not see me." When the meeting adjourned, I slipped from the room, the papers pressed close to my heart. In the hallways, I found allies, old advisors who had served this family before Mina's reign of velvet knives. Men who remembered my mother's kindness, women who had seen the cracks in Mina's perfect facade. One of them, a man with hair the color of late autumn and eyes that missed nothing, found me in the quiet of the library one evening. His voice was low, a cautious whisper beneath the hush of the chandeliers. "You're risking everything," he said, his tone a blend of warning and reluctant respect. I looked up from the open ledger in my lap, my gaze steady and calm. "It's not risk," I told him, my voice soft but unshakable. "It's restoration. My mother's legacy, my father's dignity. This house was built on more than Mina's illusions." His lips parted as though to argue, but then he only nodded once, a small, resigned bow of his head. "If you need allies, Miss Alara," he said quietly, "you will find them in those who remember your mother's laughter more than Mina's commands." I thanked him with a smile that felt like the first true warmth I had known in days. I learned to move through the boardroom like a chess piece. Each question a calculated move, each quiet glance a seed of doubt sown in the minds of those who watched from behind careful masks. I watched Mina's smile begin to strain at the edges, the brightness in her eyes turning wary with each carefully placed question I asked. In the mirror of her wariness, I found my own power. Silent, patient, as sharp as any blade. My internal voice grew louder with every step I took down those hushed hallways, a quiet, unyielding strength that burned in the hollow of my chest. I am no longer the girl who waits to be seen, I thought as I watched Mina across the boardroom table, her fingers tightening around the edge of her teacup. I will be the one who reveals the truth, no matter how carefully she tries to bury it. That evening, I returned to my room and stood at the window. The city lights a shimmering sea below. The weight of the ledges in my arms felt like the weight of my mother's hand on my shoulder. Steady? Sure. My reflection in the glass was a woman carved from memory and quiet fury, her eyes bright with the promise of a reckoning that could no longer be denied. Outside, the winter wind howled against the glass, carrying with it the scent of frost and the sharp tang of night air. I pressed my forehead to the cool pane, my breath misting the glass. Tomorrow, the game will begin again, and I will be ready. In the hush of the night, I let the city's lights fill the silence around me. Each flicker, a vow whispered in the dark. The weight of legacy settled around my shoulders like a mantle. My mother's gift, my father's burden, my own quiet war. The night held its breath, and I held mine with it. My resolve was quiet as the snow that fell beyond the window, each flake a promise that even the coldest winter cannot last forever. The night air was sharp against the window pane, the city lights a restless tide of gold and silver far below. I stood in the quiet of my room, my reflection a pale echo in the glass, eyes that had learned the weight of silence, lips that curved in a faint, knowing smile. My fingers traced the cold surface, the city beyond shimmering like a constellation I could almost touch. The game is shifting, I thought, the words steady in my mind. The threads of her perfect facade fray with each question I ask. Morning broke soft and cold, the sky a canvas of pale lavender and fading stars. I dressed with deliberate care, the dark green of my blouse a quiet echo of the ledgers that had become my shield. My hair fell in gentle waves down my back, each strand a line of calm defiance. In the mirror, my eyes were clear, steady, and unafraid. The boardroom was a theater of hushed voices and careful glances, the long table polished to a mirror's shine beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. Mina sat at the head of the table, her hair pinned in a perfect twist, her pale suit pressed to an impossible precision. The diamond at her throat caught the light with each movement, a flicker of cold brilliance that could not mask the faint tightness in her shoulders. My father sat beside her, his posture straight, his eyes drifting from face to face as though he were searching for something he could not name. His fingers drummed a soft, restless rhythm on the armrest, a quiet song of confusion and faded memory. I took my seat across from them, the thick folder of documents in my lap a silent promise. My heart was a slow, measured beat in my chest. No longer the staccato rush of fear, but the steady pulse of strategy. The meeting began with the usual murmurs. Profit margins, expansion plans, the careful dance of numbers that had always been the lifeblood of this family. Mina spoke with the practiced ease of someone who had worn this crown for years, her voice a melody of calm authority. "Our overseas interests remain strong," she said, her gaze sweeping the room like a benediction. "The board's faith in our stewardship has been well placed." I let the silence stretch for a moment, my fingertips brushing the edge of the folder in my lap. Then I lifted my gaze to her, my voice a soft thread of ice in the warm hush. "Have the cross-ledger audits accounted for the discrepancies in the Zurich account?" I asked, my tone light as air, each word a stone in the still water. A hush fell across the table, the faint scrape of a chair, the slow turn of a page. Mina's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of something behind the practiced calm. A faint shadow, quick and sharp, that slipped through her composure like a crack in glass. Her hand tightened around the pen in her grip, the knuckles whitening beneath the pressure. "The Zurich account is secure," she said, the faintest hesitation turning the edge of her voice. "There is nothing unusual there." I watched her in the quiet that followed, the way her breath paused in her chest, the way her fingers stilled for a single heartbeat before she forced them to move again. My lips curved in a small, private smile, one that did not reach my eyes. "I see it now, the fracture in the mask. Power wears thin when it is built on lies." I leaned back in my chair, the folder still closed in my lap, my expression serene. "Of course," I said softly, each syllable a quiet challenge. "I would like to review the reconciliations myself, for transparency's sake." Mina's smile was slow and deliberate, but the corners of her mouth trembled, the diamond at her throat winking with each shallow breath. "Your sudden interest in these affairs is admirable," she said, her tone smooth as silk but edged with something brittle, "though perhaps best left to those who understand the complexity." I met her gaze with calm certainty, my fingers brushing over the folder's edge. "I understand more than you think," I said, each word measured and certain. "And I will understand it all before this ends." A faint flush rose in her cheeks, a fleeting bloom of anger quickly smoothed away. My father watched us from his seat, his eyes drifting between us with a confusion that ached like a bruise in the hollow of my chest. Yet as I met his gaze, I thought I saw a flicker, brief as a breath, but real, of something like recognition. A faint tightening of his brow, a breath that paused in his throat. Even lost in the fog, he sees something. Even if he cannot name it, he feels the truth in the shape of my voice. When the meeting ended, the room dissolved into a quiet flurry of polite conversation and careful glances. I rose from my seat with deliberate calm, the soft rustle of my skirt a quiet echo in the stillness. Mina lingered at the head of the table, her eyes following me with a cold, wary gleam. I paused at her side, close enough to see the faint tremor in her fingers as they rested on the table's edge. My voice was soft, almost sweet, as I tilted my head and smiled. "You should rest, sister," I said, each word a silken dagger. "All this, stress cannot be good for you." Her lips parted in a small, sharp gasp, her eyes darkening with something that was almost fear. "Don't think you've won," she said, her voice low, a whisper meant only for me. I let out a soft laugh, the sound warm and unhurried. "I'm not here to win," I said, my smile gentle, my gaze steady. "I'm here to end the game." For a moment the world seemed to still around us. The hush of the room, the soft flicker of the chandelier's light, the faint echo of footsteps in the hall. Mina's eyes met mine, and in that silence I saw the truth. The empire she had built was crumbling beneath the weight of her own lies. My father's eyes found mine across the room, lost and yet almost calm. His hand stilled on the armrest, and for a single breath the confusion in his gaze softened, as though he could see the shape of the girl I had been, the daughter he had once called his own. "I am no longer the girl who waits to be seen. I am the one who will reveal the truth, and no whispered lie will silence me." I turned and walked from the room, each step a quiet beat of finality in the hush. In the hallway beyond, the winter light streamed through tall windows, each pane a mirror of ice and bright promise. The door closed behind me, the faint click a quiet punctuation. My heart was a steady drum in my chest, each beat a vow, each breath a promise. The game was not over. Mina's cracks had begun to show, and I would not stop until every secret she guarded lay bare in the winter light. I paused at the end of the corridor, my hand resting on the cool marble of the banister. The hush of the house wrapped around me, the silence deep and waiting. My reflection in the tall window was a woman carved from resolve, her eyes bright with the quiet fire of certainty. The cracks are there, and through them I will bring the light. The winter night was velvet dark beyond the tall windows of the grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers spilled light like shattered stars onto marble floors. The air shimmered with the soft hum of an orchestra, each note a careful illusion of refinement. I moved through the crowd with measured grace, the hem of my midnight blue gown whispering over the polished floor like a secret in the hush. My heart was a steady, deliberate drumbeat in my chest, each breath drawing in the weight of the night, the weight of every silent promise I had carried through the halls of this house. The family's annual foundation gala had always been Mina's stage, a carefully orchestrated performance of perfection. Yet tonight, the script belonged to me. I paused at the edge of the ballroom, my eyes sweeping over the gathered guests in their polished shoes and glittering jewels. Mina stood near the head table, her pale gown catching the glow of the chandeliers, her smile a careful mask of triumph. Her hand rested lightly on my father's arm, each fingertip a tether that bound him to her careful charade. His eyes were distant, clouded, and unsure, but there was a faint furrow to his brow, a quiet ache that had begun to echo through the fog of his mind. My breath caught in my throat at the sight of him, the man I remembered buried in the hollow of his own confusion. Tonight, I will give him back the truth, I thought, the words a quiet flame in the darkness. Even if he cannot hold it, I will give it to him for a single heartbeat. I crossed the ballroom with deliberate calm, the soft music weaving around me like a cloak. The projector waited at the far end of the room, a sleek machine that held within it every secret, every ledger, every truth that Mina had tried to bury in the quiet hush of her perfect smile. As the music shifted into a gentle waltz, I stepped onto the stage, the small rise of it beneath my feet, a quiet assertion of power. Conversations stilled, heads turned, and the hush that followed was a breath held in the winter air. Mina's eyes found mine, her lips parting in a faint smile that did not reach the cold gleam in her gaze. "Ilara," she said softly, her voice a velvet thread. "What are you doing?" I met her gaze steadily, my fingers brushing the small remote in my hand. A single gesture, a final chord in the symphony I had built from the silence she had tried to force upon me. My voice was calm, quiet, yet each word was a blade. "I have something to share," I said, my tone even, unhurried. "A story written in numbers and signatures, one you tried to erase." The first image flickered to life behind me, the projector's light spilling across the white screen like dawn. A ledger page, my mother's handwriting in the margins, her final act of defiance. Gasps rippled through the room, the hush of disbelief, a tide that rose to meet me. Nina's smile wavered, a single crack that spread through the careful calm of her expression. Her hand tightened on my father's sleeve, her knuckles white in the soft glow of the chandeliers. The next image, forged signatures, the delicate curl of her name where it did not belong. Bank statements, each line a quiet confession of theft, woven in the shadows of trust. The air grew sharp with the collective breath of the crowd, each whisper a ripple of truth cutting through the lies. My father's eyes lifted to the screen, a slow, uncertain motion. His lips parted, a small, broken sound escaping him, a question or a memory, caught in the haze that had become his world. My heart ached at the sight, but I did not look away. Mina's voice cut through the hush, sharp and brittle. "This is nothing but confusion, fabricated lies meant to wound this family," she said, her tone brittle beneath the sweet veneer. "Ilara, stop this nonsense." I turned to her, my gaze calm, my voice steady. "You taught me how to play this game, sister," I said softly, the words gentle but unyielding. "I learned well." The final image appeared behind me. Medical records. Each line a testament to the manipulation of my father's medication. The slow erosion of his mind, not by nature, but by careful, calculated cruelty. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. a sound that felt like the breaking of a dam. My father's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. For a single, shivering moment, the fog in his gaze cleared. His eyes found mine across the hush, a single thread of recognition that trembled between us. "Ilara," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking on the shape of my name. "My daughter." Tears welled in my eyes, a fragile shimmer in the light, but my voice did not falter. "I'm here, Appa," I said, my voice soft and proud, each word a vow. "I've always been here." Mina's scream tore through the quiet, a sound of rage and disbelief that rang sharp as crystal in the air. She lunged forward, her hand reaching for the projector, her voice a hiss of denial. "Lies," she spat, her calm cracking beneath the weight of the truth. "All of it lies." Yet the proof was there. Each flickering image a testament she could not silence. The board members rose from their seats, their voices a rising tide of questions and cold fury. My father's fingers reached for mine across the distance of the room, his hand trembling in the air as though to bridge the years of forgetting. This is not revenge, I thought, my heart a quiet echo of the girl I had once been. This is truth, a final act of love for the man who gave me my name. I stepped forward, my dress a whisper of midnight silk in the hush, my eyes never leaving his. Mina's empire crumbled around her, the careful web of her lies unraveling thread by thread beneath the light of each exposed secret. My father's eyes were wet with tears, confusion and memory colliding in their depths. His lips parted once more, a single breath that held the shape of my name. "Ilara," he whispered again, his voice a shivering promise in the quiet. "My daughter." The orchestra had fallen silent, the music of the night replaced by the quiet thunder of truth. The chandelier's light glimmered above us, each crystal a star reborn in the hush. I reached for his hand, my fingers wrapping around his with a tenderness that steadied my breath. "This is the moment, Appa, for you to see me if only for a heartbeat." Mina's scream dissolved into silence, her power a hollow echo in the hush of the room. The proof glowed behind me, each line of ink a testament to the quiet war I had waged in the shadows. The night held its breath as I stood at the center of the storm, my heart calm, my voice steady. The truth was laid bare, and in that light I found the final chord of my mother's legacy and the echo of the girl I had never truly lost. This is the final act, and it is mine. The room was still, the hush of the night holding the echoes of the truth that had finally been spoken. The glow of the projector faded into darkness, leaving only the quiet breath of the chandeliers and the faint scent of roses wilting in the cold air. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my hand wrapped around my father's, feeling the tremor in his fingers, the fragile warmth of skin that had once lifted me high above the world. Mina's empire lay in ruins around her, her name stripped from every ledger, every document she had once twisted into a testament of her own ambition. She stood beneath the harsh light of the chandeliers, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, her pale gown a shroud for the truth she had tried to bury. Her eyes met mine across the quiet hush, a flicker of something like disbelief in their depths, and then she turned away, her figure retreating into the shadows of her own making. My father's gaze lingered on me, confusion and memory warring in the pale blue of his eyes. His lips moved slowly, each breath a labor, yet the shape of my name was a soft exhale of devotion. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice a whisper that trembled like a candle in the dark. "My daughter." I held his hand gently, my fingers wrapping around his with a tenderness that felt like the final promise of the girl I had once been. "You were always my father," I whispered, the words a balm in the hush. "Even when you forgot." A faint smile touched the corners of his lips, a ghost of the warmth that had once filled every room he entered. "Ilara, always," he breathed, his eyes softening, the fog of confusion lifting for the briefest of heartbeats. I pressed his hand to my cheek, closing my eyes as I let the quiet warmth of that moment settle into my bones. "He sees me," I thought, the words a gentle echo in my chest. "Even if it is only for this single breath, he sees me." The will was rewritten in the days that followed, each line of ink a testament to the truth that could no longer be denied. Minna's name was stripped away, her empire of illusions reduced to ash and whispers. The lawyers spoke in hushed tones. their pens scratching the final chords of the story she had tried to steal. My name, once buried beneath the weight of her ambition, was written in the careful, deliberate script of the family's legacy. The night after the final signing, I found myself in the music room, the air scented with cedar and the soft perfume of old memories. The piano waited in the corner, its keys a promise of songs yet unsung. I moved to it slowly, my fingers tracing the smooth ivory, each note a memory of my mother's gentle touch, the echo of her laughter woven into the quiet spaces of this house. My father sat beside me, his breath slow and even, his eyes drifting over the room with a soft, unfocused calm. He wore a simple sweater, the color of old snow, and in the lamplight he looked almost peaceful, like a man who had come to the end of a long and weary journey. I pressed a single key, the note a soft echo in the hush. My fingers moved over the keys, the melody slow and unhurried, a quiet waltz that filled the room with the music of memory and forgiveness. My father's head tilted slightly, his eyes closing, as though the sound was a balm to the confusion that still lingered in the shadows of his mind. "Do you remember this song, Appa?" I asked softly, my voice a gentle tremor in the quiet. Mother used to play it in the evenings when the world outside was too loud." He smiled faintly, his fingers twitching in his lap, a memory flickering in the soft lines of his face. "Your mother, she loved this music," he said, his voice a slow exhale of something that felt like peace. "She would play, and I would watch." I closed my eyes, letting the notes wash over me, each chord a thread that tied the girl I had been to the woman I had become. This is what she left me, I thought, my heart quiet and steady. Not the wealth of this house, but the music of her laughter, the softness of her love. When the final notes faded into the hush, I turned to him, my hand finding his once more. His eyes were distant again, the fog creeping back in slow, patient waves, yet his fingers tightened around mine with a quiet strength. "You were always my father," I whispered, the words a final vow. "Even when you forgot?" He smiled, a faint curve of his lips that held the echo of the man he had been. "Elara," he murmured, his breath soft as the winter wind. "Always." I held his hand as he drifted into sleep, the room bathed in the soft glow of the lamplight, the quiet sigh of the piano the only sound. Outside the window, the city shimmered in the darkness, each light a promise that the night could never steal. I rose from the piano bench, my heart a gentle ache in my chest, my steps slow and measured as I crossed to the window. The city spread out before me, the quiet hum of life moving on, a river of light and shadow that stretched into forever. My reflection in the glass was a woman of quiet strength, her eyes bright with the memory of all she had reclaimed. The name she tried to bury is mine again, I thought. The words a final echo of the girl I had been. My story, my family, reclaimed. The music room held its breath around me, the air warm with the scent of old cedar and the quiet glow of the past. I let my eyes linger on the city one last time, the lights of the world beyond this house a testament to everything I had fought to remember. When I turned away from the window, my heart was steady, my breath calm. My story was written in the hush of these rooms, in the quiet strength of the father who had once called me his little star, and in the music of a piano that would never forget the echo of my mother's love. I walked from the music room with the soft steps of a daughter who had found her way home. The door closed behind me, the final note of a melody that would never fade. And in the stillness of the night, I carried the quiet triumph of that final chord, the knowledge that I was seen, that I was remembered, and that in the end, the truth had been mine to reclaim. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have said in Elara's place? When did you find the courage to stand for what was already yours? Subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet voices who refuse to fade.